Greetings. Today I'm going to cover the Ultramarines. Some of these characters I've already briefly covered in a previous video, however today I'm going to go a bit more in depth. First, my guest Occam the Untrue will talk briefly about who the Ultramarines are, and then I'll get into the character details. Occam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ekatoon. Ultramarines are the poster boy chapter of the Space Marines. Space Marines are genetically enhanced super soldiers. They were built with the purpose of reuniting humanity, which had been scattered throughout the stars and cut off from each other and Terra due to warp storms during the time known as the Old Night. When it comes to combat, Ultramarines are a jack of all trades, master of none. Now, to some this might come off as an insult, but their expertise is actually in logistics and bureaucracy. During the Horus Heresy, an event that occurred about 10,000 Terran years ago, their excellence in bureaucracy and logistics, in conjunction with having an extremely stable gene seed, allowed them to expand their legion to greater numbers than any other legion at the time, with greater than 250,000 Space Marines. The only other legions at the time to have reportedly come close to this number were the Wordbearers and the Alpha Legion. Their Primarch Rebute Gilliman wrote the text referred to as the Codex Astartes, which provides guidelines for military organization, tactics, strategy, and even moral behavior. This text is largely adhered to by the majority of the loyalist chapters of Space Marines, and to the Ultramarines it is considered sacred, and they only deviate from its teachings when the situation offers no other viable options. One such notable deviation was against the Alpha Legion during the Horus Heresy. The Alpha Legion, assuming that the Ultramarines would adhere to their codex, set a trap, which was cleverly avoided by the Ultramarines who deviated from their codex. Hardly worth noting, it is believed that Alpharius, Primarch of the Alpha Legion, was slain during this engagement. I say this is hardly worth noting because it is likely a deception. Today the numbers of the Ultramarines are in line with the restrictions laid down in the Codex Astartes, which restricts each chapter of Space Marines to no more than 1,000 Marines. The Ultramarines Legion was split into a great many successor chapters, which currently account for over 2/3 of all Space Marine chapters. This chapter of Space Marines is one of the few to thus far have been reunited with their lost Primarch, Rebute Gilliman. Hydrodominatus.
Thank you. Now let's review each character, see what sorts of roles they might fill within the meta, and how much you should invest in them if you're looking to maximize your efficiency. During this section, I'll also rank these characters in a few categories like survival, raid damage, and PvP damage. My ranking is out of the 67 characters currently released in the Pre-Adeptus Mechanicus version of the game. My survival ranking is based off of health, armor, traits, and passive abilities. This doesn't fully capture all the aspects of the game. My raid and PvP damage rankings are calculated using base damage, number of hits, crit modifiers, pierce ratio, and the average armor of a legendary raid boss or the average character armor for PvP, as well as whether or not the character is a psyker for raid boss psyker damage reduction traits. Tigurius is a psyker, referred to as a librarian, that I rank at a 61 out of 67 for survival, 30 for PvP damage, and 58 for guild raid damage. There are 3 raid bosses that reduce incoming psyker damage, which is part of why he ranks so poorly for raid bosses. He's got a sort of AoE chain lightning active that can help clear mobs, and his passive buffs his adjacent allies, making them more resilient against psychic damage and granting an extra block chance. He's required for the Indomitus campaign. I would not advise pushing him much further than Silver 1, unless you're having difficulty with him surviving in the hard version of the Indomitus campaign, or you just really like him. Many in the community rate him as C tier. Certus is a scout sniper that I rank at 56 of 67 for survival, 27 for PvP damage, and 25 for guild raid damage. Given that he has only 2 movement and has only a single hit, I would personally rank him lower for guild raids as he doesn't really synergize with the top meta at the moment. His Overwatch trait and active that pushes enemies back give him some potential in PvP, but his lack of mobility can be a huge hindrance. His passive, if used properly, can help to mitigate damage a decent amount against multi-hit attacks. Again, like Tigurius, he's required for the Indomitus campaign, and I wouldn't advise pushing him further than Silver 1 unless you're having difficulty keeping him alive in the hard Indomitus campaign. Outside the campaign, his main usefulness is in PvP, and PvP doesn't currently go higher than Silver 1. The community ranks him as B tier. Bellator is an Inceptor Sergeant that I rank at 43 for survival, 61 for PvP damage, and 46 for raid damage. Well, these rankings are a little bit misleading, and I may need to create a better formula for calculating raid damage. He's tanky for a summoner. That's great. And his survival is enhanced by his Mark 10 Gravis armor, a trait that can be negated by crits and is obviously ignored by psychic damage. His summons can be hugely distracting in PvP, and synergize quite well with Eldrion for guild raids. He has 4 movement and flying, which make him very maneuverable, and if positioned next to his summons, he can really bolster their damage. This character is definitely worth investing in. He is rated as S tier or superior by the community. Incisus is an apothecary that I rank at 8 for survival, 18 for PvP damage, and 35 for guild raid damage. His ability to heal himself, combined with his above average health and armor, give him an exceptional survival rating, as my formula takes into account the ability to heal oneself. His high piercing damage helps him get past most armor in PvP. While my formula ranks him at average for guild raid damage, he, like Certus, doesn't synergize well with the current meta. Incisus might be the most underrated character in the game. Of the 3 healers in the game, he ranks 3rd, but he's 2nd in durability amongst them. So he's a below average healer with above average melee damage. He isn't required for any campaigns, and he tends to perform poorly in guild raids. The community rates him as D tier, however the game isn't strictly about guild raids, and that's largely how the community tends to rate a character, but I think he might have some potential in other places. With that said, invest in him at your own peril. Marnius Calgar, ranking in 24 for survival, 63 for PvP damage, and 51 for guild raid damage. His active ability does amazing AoE damage, and his Mark 10 Gravis armor, with 50% more armor than Bellator, makes him exceedingly resilient. His passive buff makes him useful for guild raids. Calgar is useful in every game mode. The community rates him as S tier, and I agree. If you manage to acquire him, you would not be wasting your resources investing heavily into him.
A wise general makes a point of foraging on the enemy. 1 cartload of the enemy's provisions is equivalent to 20 of one's own.